Before we get into the video itself, let's take a good look at the thumbnail for it. So, the video is called Ben Shapiro Slams AOC's Insane Explanation of Crime Surge, and the thumbnail... Now, we all know, like, Ben Shapiro is super duper thirsty for, we all know Ben Shapiro is, like, really thirsty for AOC, right? With, like, the feet pics, please debate me, please, why doesn't she care about my feelings? We all know the memes, right? But, and we're not going to talk too much about that today. Those are easy jabs at Ben Shapiro. Let's take a look at the actual arguments. Starting with what we see in the thumbnail. So you've got AOC, photoshopped onto this body that I don't believe is hers, with a sign saying, "No jobs or food equals more crime." And the video, or the point of the video, is to disprove this claim. The idea that having no jobs or food, or being impoverished, broadly speaking, causes crime. This is just an undeniable fact. No sociologist disagrees with this. Nobody who studies, like, why crime happens for a living would disagree with this. Why do people commit crime? Do you think, hey Ben, do you think maybe they're genetically predisposed to it? Because of their skin color or something? I'm sure you don't believe that, right? So it has to be socioeconomic. Unless you're just an open racist, right? And you wouldn't be an open racist, would you, Ben? Would you? Nah, you wouldn't be racist, Ben. You would never do a racism. So, with all of that said, let's get into the video itself.
Remember how crime was not going to skyrocket when we got rid of the cops? Remember that? That was funny. That was really super funny.
Okay, I got shit for this last time I covered Ben Shapiro, and I pointed this out, but I can't not acknowledge it. Ben's complexion is not looking good. Like, listen, maybe I'm speaking from like a pretty like privileged space here. Now, my skin definitely isn't perfect. My complexion isn't great. But like, I'm using a shitty like Logitech Brio webcam, which is, I mean, shitty by the standards of what Ben Shapiro has access to here. He also has access to way better lighting and everything, and like, his complexion is not looking good. Now, this has nothing to do with his arguments. I just wanted to point it out because I can't ignore it. I can't bring myself to ignore it. All right, let's go ahead and see.
I bring you the genius of AOC. Okay, so AOC was asked about why crime is continuing to surge.
AOC, please notice me.
Like New York. And it is continuing to surge. So the New York Post reports, New York's plague of gun crime continued this weekend, with 15 people shot in the same number of hours since midday on Saturday, police sources told the Post. So 15...
So why do people commit crime, Ben? That's more or less like where... That's more or less like where we have to go with this, right? Why is crime surging right now? Well, I mean, if I were to take a wild guess why crime in New York is surging right now, if this is even true, it's possible it's not. A lot of reactionaries, something that they'll do is they'll take some data, or they'll take some, or they'll cite some source that demonstrates a spike in crime or a spike in anything. But if you look at the big picture, there's actually a downward trend. But they'll use like a small spike that they can point to and isolate as like an example to make an argument. But regardless, we're going to go ahead and assume it is true that there is a big crime spike happening in New York City right now. There is no question within the academic community why people commit crime. People commit crime because they have to. Usually, generally. I mean, obviously, rape and murder, that's like a whole other scenario. But even that has some sociological or socioeconomic ties, right? You're more likely to grow up to be a rapist if you grew up in a shitty home situation, right? Like a shitty socioeconomic situation, you went to a bad school, you didn't have very good opportunity and education, but for the most part, most crime is non-violent offenses. You know, possession of drugs, selling of drugs, robbery, breaking and entering, trespassing, things like that. That is the most crime. And people don't commit these crimes for no reason. They do it for socioeconomic reasons. There's a reason why poor neighborhoods always have more crime going on than rich neighborhoods, unless that rich neighborhood is right next door to a poor neighborhood, and poor criminals from the poor neighborhood are coming over to do crime in the rich neighborhood. But generally, there is a very there's a pretty big correlation, like a very easy correlation you can draw. So what's going on right now in New York City? Well, right now, coronavirus is happening. A bunch of people can't go to work because of robbery is violent. Well, okay, yes, robbery is violent. I apologize. Theft and burglary is non-violent. Thank you, Noglod33. So right now, there is a worldwide pandemic happening that has spiraled the United States into a state of emergency, more or less. I mean, we should be in one. I mean, if we were in one, we would probably have a lot less to deal with in regards to, lockdowns and cases and everything. But for more or less, there's a lot of places that are shut down, a lot of places where you can't, go to work. You got to be really careful even to go out and shop. It's really, really tough. So it's understandable that when things are as shitty as they are now, there's probably going to be a pretty big spike in crime. But let's go ahead and hear what our boy Benny has to say about it.
Shootings in 15 hours in New York City. The shootings, including a 21-year-old man left fighting for his life after being shot in the head while sitting in a car in Sheepshead Bay early on Sunday, were more in one day than the whole of the same week last year, according to sources. They capped 43 shootings so far this week, more than triple last year's tally of 13 for the same period. I'd gone to bed early, and the next thing I knew, I heard two pops out my window that sounded just like fireworks, said a neighbor who identified herself as Lucy of the Sheepshead Bay shooting. Well, I heard plenty of...
God, I wish the grift was this easy on the left. Imagine just being able to just make videos that are 7 to 10 minutes long. By the way, the reason why the video is so short now and he didn't stretch it to 10 minutes is because YouTube made it so that you can have mid-roll ads in 5 to 8 minute videos, 8 minute videos now, instead of having to stretch it out to the 10-minute mark. How fucking crazy would it be if you could become a left-wing grifter, quartering type, by just reading articles online and regurgitating the same lefty talking points? That's kind of what I do, but I have to actually respond to stuff and have some kind of some level of good rhetoric and some pretty decent understanding of these topics to respond to these things. But these reactionary grifter types, all they have to do is read an article and then just comment on it. They don't have to think about it very much. They just have to reaffirm the bias of the people that already watch them. Because to arrive at the conservative position does not take a lot of thinking, right? Conservative positions are you come to the position that conservatives do entirely through misunderstanding of a situation and through just assuming just your base assumptions, going off of and building your worldview around your base assumptions about things, right? And in the case of Ben Shapiro, who is arguably a more competent person on the right, in his case, all he has to do is was the word post-hoc, I believe it is, post-hoc rationalize, basically search out for data and whatnot that confirms his already existing bias, even if that means he has to take data and studies out of context and warp them to try to back up his or post-hoc justification, to back up his beliefs. And that's why Ben Shapiro comes off as a more effective rhetorician for the right, even though his positions are incorrect in almost every way.
Fireworks around here a week ago. I didn't think anything of it until I heard someone screaming, and then there were police lights and ambulance lights. So there are tons and tons of shootings over the weekend. Commissioner Dermot Shea has blamed bail reform and prisoner releases over the coronavirus pandemic for the alarming rise in gun crime, which has brought increased criticism for Mayor Bill de Blasio. Criminal justice experts say the cops should focus on the flow of illegal guns into the...
Is this a stream clip? maybe I'm wrong, but is this does Ben Shapiro live stream? Was this a stream clip from his stream and that's why this comes off as so cobbled together? I get he's in his house right now because of Corona and quarantine and all that, but this feels so weird. Most of Ben Shapiro's videos aren't like this. Is it he has a podcast? It could be his podcast, maybe. Yeah, interesting.
the city instead of just playing the blame game. So you're never supposed to blame the politicians for cutting the cops. You're supposed to blame the cops for not doing a better job policing while you're cutting the cops. By the way, crime is surging around the country. It is not just in New York City. According to the Wall Street Journal, in Milwaukee, homicides are up 37% so far this year, on pace to break the record of 167 in 1991, which included 16 murders by Jeffrey Dahmer. Homicides so far this year in Chicago are ahead of the pace in 2016. That was the city's highest tally since 1996.
Yeah, there is a worldwide pandemic happening. America is in a state of emergency, more or less. Yeah, crime is probably going to skyrocket during a time like this. There was a reason why the government sent stimulus checks to people. Because people are not making as much money. Of course crime's gonna go up in a time like this. What are you talking about? Crime always goes up during times like this. If there's a war happening, or if there's like a natural disaster. Like, okay, hold on. I can speak, you know, he's using anecdote here. He's just like reading off stories, right? I'll use some anecdote of my own, right? We'll fight fire with fire here. When I was 16 years old, my neighborhood and my, like the area that I lived was decimated by a hurricane called Hurricane Hermine. And it flooded my house. We ended up having to move. We were homeless for a little while. That happened when I was 16. But there were a lot of people that came and were just looting houses after the hurricane. And crime went up in that area after the hurricane happened. Of course, a natural disaster had just happened. Why wouldn't people commit more crime when something bad happens? It's a worldwide pandemic. Of course, people are committing more crime. What are you talking about, Ben?
In New York and LA, killings this year are up 23% and 11.6%. In Kansas City, Missouri, they've recorded 99 killings since January, far outpacing any record for the first 6 months of the year.
Also, I should point out right now, I know this for a fact, crime has been on the downfall for about 10 to 20 years now. More or less, there's been a pretty blatant downward spike in crime. And do you know how I know this? Who wants to know how I know that there has been an overall net decrease in crime over the last 10 to 15 to 20 years? Because a lot of, like, back in the day, when people like, what's his name? Who remembers, his last name's Thompson? He's like the lawyer from Florida who hates video games? What's his name? Jack Thompson. Back when Jack Thompson would say that video games were making people more violent, gamers would point to the crime stats and say different kind of crime stats than the one they point at today. I'll have you know. But they point to the crime stats and show that that crime has been on a decrease and on the downfall since video games became a popular art form and a medium that people engaged with. Just to like argue against that point. So yes, I know that crime is on an overall net downfall. So Ben is doing that thing that I mentioned earlier. Well, they'll like. Oh, fuck. How can I want to visualize this for you guys. Hold on. Here, I'll visualize it for you, okay? Alright. So, let's say this line represents crime in America, right? So, let's say this is like 1980, right here. We'll say this is 1980, and this is like where we are now. This is... Or I'll do it like... Fuck, hold on. Hold on, gotta move my webcam. There we go. So let's say, and we'll say this is like where we are now, right? So crime, from my knowledge, has been on the decrease for a while now. Like sometimes it'll spike up, you know. But for the most part, there has been a pretty steady decrease in crime, okay? But if you're Ben Shapiro, this is what you do. To fit a narrative, you'll just ignore the overall trend in this statistic, and you'll just screenshot this. You'll just screenshot this window of time. Like, oh, look, crime's going up. In reality, it's falling, and there's been a trend of falling crime since, like, the 90s. And this is like a pretty well-known fact in terms of statistics. All right. Nice meme, Ben. I would expect no less from you.
Community groups acknowledge the crime increase, but say more aggressive policing to combat it shouldn't come at the expense of enacting broader reform. Oh, is that what's happening right now? It is not a shock that as you continue to slash police budgets and signal to criminals that they can basically get away with it, and that if a cop attempts to defend a citizen, that cop may be hauled up for arrest, that's going to be...
Wow, there is a lot to take apart there. A lot of bullshit. Okay, so for starters, what do people mean when they say defund the police? What is happening when the police are defunded? Defunding the police isn't necessarily taking money away from any type of law enforcement. It's about reallocating resources, including money, to other departments that may be more effectively capable of handling certain situations. Having police with guns show up to every single situation, having that looming threat, certainly can help with crime. But it has been demonstrated that increasing police presence in an area does not make it more safe and does not decrease crime. This has been demonstrated time and time again. On top of that, reallocating resources to other departments and other types of law enforcement that may be less, prone to engage in brutality and maybe more effective in handling certain situations is probably a good idea. We probably shouldn't have cops going to domestic violence disputes. It should probably be somebody more qualified to do so, somebody who is who has been specifically trained to do that kind of stuff. What about someone who should be called if, like, let's say like a kid is getting beaten by their parents and they call the police? Maybe it's a good idea to have a very specific division that shows up when something like that happens. Reallocate resources to those areas. Give the money to fucking fire. Like, there's a reason why cops don't show up to put out a fire. Yeah, suicides. If somebody's suicidal, they need to have a special team. Now, these already exist, I imagine, for a lot of these, but funding them and allocating more resources behind them is probably a pretty good idea. The police budget is already way too high. This is a well-known fact. We in America have overfunded police and overfunded military. This has been being said since the 80s. So in the immortal words, as a matter of fact, this is what we're doing. We're finally doing it. In the immortal words of George Carlin, balance the fucking budget. And we're finally doing it. And Ben Shapiro is bitching. So what Ben's trying to do here is explain a rise in crime by blaming cuts in the budgets of the police. That's what he's trying to do here, even though the real reason is probably due to the fact that we're running into an economic recession due to Corona, and the fact that there's a natural disaster, like it's sort of a natural disaster, a virus, a pandemic, kind of a natural disaster happening right now that is affecting everybody, and is just like by nature going to cause more crime to occur. God, imagine being how does this guy have such a massive platform?
A bit of a problem. City leaders and law enforcement officials say the months of lockdown, rising unemployment, more guns on the street, and the fallout from mass protests over the George Floyd killing helped create conditions for more violence. At the same time, law enforcement officials say they are weighing the risks of aggressively enforcing the law, concerned that a backlash from activists, protesters, and residents could trigger attacks on police or a replay of the riots and looting that marked some of the earlier protests.
Nice.
In some cases, officials say police are backing away from some kinds of petty crime arrests that give them a higher profile on the street, hoping to quell tensions, which, of course, is exactly the wrong tactic.
No, good. Wait, most non-violent petty crime probably doesn't need to have police, fucking with them. Listen, I'm gonna be honest with you here. Here's my scalding hot take, okay? Arresting most non-violent criminals, or people engaging in non-violent crime, like drug possession, even selling drugs, things like that, it's not going to help anything. It's not going to solve any problems. Putting someone in prison, especially we got to acknowledge it, if you're black, then that's not going to help you. Putting people in prison, you're going to be more likely to come out and have to resort to crime. Then you have no choice. That's the whole point of reallocating resources.
It's exactly the wrong tactic. Broken windows policing, which was utilized in New York City in the aftermath of the Great Crime Wave beginning in the 60s and stretching all the way to the early 1990s. Broken window policing was the idea that you have to stop ignoring the people who are jumping turnstiles. You actually have to start policing small-level crime, because if you don't, then people will engage in larger-scale crime.
That is not how crime works. I'm sorry, but no sociologist, no criminologist, nobody who knows anything about crime and why it's caused would agree that, oh yeah, if we let people engage in small crimes like trespassing, jumping turnstiles, like the small crime that he just described, that then they're going to start engaging in more violent crime because they're going to be like, oh yeah, we can get away with this. Wait, how? This is not how policing or crime in a society works. What the fuck are you talking about? This is the same logic you would go by when raising a child. Oh yeah, if I let my kid get away with like small things, they might start to try more things that are a little bit worse against the rules. Like yeah, that works when you're raising kids, not when you're trying to prevent crime from occurring in a particular population. That's not how this works. Nobody who knows anything about this would agree with what Ben's saying here. He's pulling this out of his ass.
Departments all over the country have decided they're no longer going to do this. And so naturally, you're seeing more violence. And
oh my god, no way. Hold on. You guys can't see it, but he's got a little, like, mug here that he's drinking his, hold on. He's drinking his dog cum out of. He's got a little, like, thermos here, and it says lefty tears, I'm pretty sure. Or liberal tears. It says, starts with L, and then it says tears below it. So he's unironically got, like, I imagine he sells this on his store, like a lefty tears mug. Oh, God. Imagine being so fucking cringy. Jesus Christ, Ben, have some self-awareness.
That violence is becoming politicized. There's an awful, awful case out of Indianapolis.
Wait, what?
Is becoming politicized in larger scale crime. Police departments all over the country have decided they're no longer going to do this. And so naturally, you're seeing more violence. And that violence is becoming politicized.
Violence is almost always political, especially when it's crime. If it's crime or police related, there is no violence involving those parties that isn't political. What are you talking about, dude? Also, you're the one politicizing it. This is literally throwing bricks from glass houses right here. You're literally the one politicizing this violence to push a narrative.
There's an awful, awful case out of Indianapolis. According to the Postmillennial, a 24-year-old named Jessica Doty was fatally shot early on Sunday, allegedly following an argument with supporters of Black Lives Matter. The victim's family said the dispute was sparked by an argument involving Black Lives Matter and language, according to Fox 59. The two sides parted ways before witnesses claimed the perpetrator opened fire from a bridge nearby and then ran away. The victim's father, Robert J. Doty, told Cassandra Fairbanks his daughter told the Black Lives Matter supporters that, quote, all lives matter. He said, apparently, the victim's fiance, Jose Ramirez, said it was squashed. They went up the hill and left, we thought, but they were sitting on St. Clair waiting for us to come under the bridge, and that's when she got shot. She had a 3-year-old son, apparently. 2 people were shot in the same area 1 week earlier, including a...
Isn't the Postmillennial basically Breitbart? Is that what he's getting his information from? Let's look at the Postmillennial, where he's getting this story from. I thought it was a little suspicious how they framed saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter. Postmillennial media bias fact check. Okay. Now, this is probably more or less like Fox News level. It's definitely pretty right-leaning, but in terms of factual reporting, it's mostly factual. So we'll say this is like a bit above Fox News, maybe. Funded by / ownership, the Postmillennial is owned and operated by the Après les Millionnaires, the Postmillennial Corporation. The website is funded through online advertising and donation links. What is this? Après les Millionnaires. Hold on, the Postmillennial Corporation. I'm curious. Okay, never mind. I know what this is. Canadian news site The Postmillennial blurs line between journalism and conservative pamphleteering. Yeah, it's more or less what I expected. Yeah, that's about right. Nice memes, Ben Shapiro. Glad to see you're getting your glad to see you're getting your information from trustworthy sources.
A 14-year-old. That 14-year-old died in what the authorities deemed an attempted armed robbery. So good things happening all across the country on crime. Thankfully, we have explanations, complex explanations for what's happening from geniuses, the likes of AOC. Alexander
Did you see how his lips trembled when he said AOC's name there? He got a bit of a chub when he said her name there. A little bit of a hate chub.
Attempted armed robbery. So good things happening all across the country on crime. Thankfully, we have explanations, complex explanations for what's happening from geniuses, the likes of AOC.
Look at him. This is the face of someone who just got a bit of a chub, you know? He's trying to hide it, but we all know. We all know, and he's ashamed of it, too. He's ashamed of the chub, but he's got one.
Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, obviously one of the very freshest of the faces. Very fresh, very face. Here she was.
Okay, dude. Okay, listen, I wasn't going to go into the Ben Shapiro wants to fuck AOC memes too much, but, like, that was weird. Like, I wouldn't... Come on, dude. Let's just rewatch that really fast.
Complex explanations for what's happening from geniuses, the likes of AOC. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, obviously one of the very freshest of the faces. Very fresh, very face. Here she was.
He's like, the blood has left his brain when he thinks about AOC. It's just he loses like a good 40 IQ points whenever he thinks about. Oh, he's got such a hate boner for her, like an unironic hate boner. Oh, it's adorable. Ben Shapiro has his first crush. Oh God.
I was explaining, the representative from New York, exactly why people are shooting each other in mass numbers in New York.
So why is this uptick in crime happening? Well, let's think about it. Do we think this has to do with the fact that there's record unemployment in the United States right now?
True.
The fact that people are at a level of economic desperation that we have not seen since the Great Recession?
True.
Maybe this has to do with the fact that people aren't paying their rent and are scared to pay their rent.
True.
And so they go out and they need to feed their child and they don't have money. So you maybe they're put in a position where they feel like they either need to shoplift some bread or go hungry that night.
So
even further, I feel okay. So this is one. I'm gonna go ahead and criticize AOC here. I feel like she was being. I understand why, because when you're a politician, you have to be very, very careful what you say. You can't. It can't come off as though she's being too nice to criminals, because that like too generous, because that's really bad for her like career prospects, and I understand that. But I do want to point out right now. This is also a justification, or not a justification, but an explanation for why more violent crime occurs. More violent crime is going to come out of a situation where there's less economic prosperity. It's going to happen. Violent crime does typically follow less violent crime if things end up escalating. It can happen. It's not like how Ben Shapiro framed it, where it's like, oh yeah, if you start letting them get away with small crimes, then they'll up it to the bigger crimes, right? It's not like that. It's not like raising a kid. It's more so the fact that in a situation where people are in an economic position where they feel they need to go out and commit crimes or small nonviolent crimes in order to take care of themselves, which is more or less what's going on here, and the explanation for this massive crime spike we're seeing. In a situation like this, you are also more likely to have violent crime occur due to the fact that these situations could escalate. What happens if you break into somebody's house to steal their TV or their laptop or something, and they've got a gun, or they run at you with a knife? That's probably going to escalate to violence. It doesn't mean it was premeditated and you came in there thinking you were going to cause some violence, but naturally speaking, if you are breaking the law, it is possible things could escalate to actual violence. And there are also other explanations for why more violent crime may be occurring as well. Outside of... They're socioeconomic for the most part. I mean, explained by this pandemic. But it's more so than just desperation. Obviously, there's a lot of people who may want to commit a particular crime that may take advantage of the current state of things in order to do it. But for the most part, and this is the consensus among basically anyone who knows anything about sociology or criminology, crime correlates almost perfectly with poverty. They're almost fucking parallel to each other when you graph them out on a chart.
Shoplifting is not the problem right now. I'm just going to point that out. Larceny is actually down in New York City. Shoplifting is not the actual issue. Shooting people in minority areas is...
Ben, why do you think larceny is on... Wait, Ben, you just said why larceny is on the downfall in New York City. Ben, Ben, it's because the police aren't enforcing low, like broken window or whatever it's called, like petty crimes, like shoplifting. You literally admitted earlier, you said this is part of your argument that they aren't enforcing those anymore. How do you know the way that we know the stats for things like this is they get arrested and it gets marked. If the police aren't enforcing that as much anymore and they aren't doing as much about it, then of course they're going to get caught less, and you're going to see a downward trend in it. It's why when you put police in more police in a particular area, statistically crime goes up because more criminals are getting arrested, and so that's added to the statistics. It doesn't mean having more cops there causes more crime. It means more criminals get arrested. Crime correlates with poverty because rich people have made the scummy things they do legal. True! True.
Is not a response to I'm hungry. Like that's not the way this works. It's not, okay, I'm missing bread tonight. Like, listen, I understand the argument that poverty drives crime. I do. I get it.
Well, then why are you arguing directly against it? This argument isn't like, oh, this is the libtard, cucky, leftist argument that poverty is caused by crime. Or crime is, well, kind of. Crime is caused by poverty. No, this is like a sociological fact. Nobody worth their salt disputes this.
But let me tell you what...
Nobody except for demagogue grifters like Ben Shapiro, of course.
Poverty generally does not have to drive. Murdering other people who are impoverished. That is not correct. Okay, if you want to say that Jean Valjean has to steal the loaf of bread because he's hungry...
Nobody's saying it's correct. It's just the reason it's happening. Wait, does Ben Shapiro think that, like, AOC and people who are analyzing why people commit crime are trying to, like, make excuses for them committing crime? Is that what he thinks is happening here? Because if that's the case, then he is fucking deluded. No. In order to prevent crime, we have to know why people commit crime. Why do you think the entire study of criminology is a thing? Am I wrong here? Hold on. I feel like this is so fucking, like, basic. Hold on. Criminology is the study of crime from a social perspective, including examining who commits crime, why they commit them, their impact, and how to prevent them. That's more or less what the study of criminology is. The reason why criminology, as a field, is so important is because in order to solve crime and to reduce it, we have to know why people commit it, so we can hit the root of the problem and try to solve it and get it and do something about it so it happens less. Yeah.
All right, that's not what you're seeing. You're seeing people shoplift a TV because they're what? Hungry for a TV? You're seeing people...
Wait, Ben, have you even like... Ben, why would you go out and shoplift a bunch of food when you can just rob somebody and take their TV and sell it for more money? So you can buy more food or pay your rent. Why would you go and like shoplift from a store like 10 times to get a week's worth of food instead of robbing one house to get a TV, selling that flat screen TV and getting probably enough food, honestly, for selling a flat screen TV, you can get enough food to feed your family for a couple weeks. Jesus Christ. Guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I have no criminology experience or anything like that. Granted, I've spoken to people who study criminology, and I'm friends with many of them. And like in high school, there were, I had like friends that were really into criminology, and they would talk about this kind of stuff, so I have like a kind of basic understanding of it, but I'm not like super learned on this shit. This is just like basic, like, first 5 minutes, page 1 criminology, right? Crime coincides with poverty. Economic prosperity typically equals less crime. This is so basic. And Ben Shapiro, who has millions of people that follow him, a massive fan base, a massive platform, is either too stupid or too dishonest to acknowledge these basic realities of why people commit crime.
People shoot each other in huge numbers in New York City. Because why? Because of the uptick in COVID or something?
Yes.
I'm going to go, this is a pretty easy answer. You withdraw the police from high crime areas and the crime goes back up. Very,
Wait, that's not what happens. Well, I mean, it is. It more or less is what happens in reality. But if we're looking at the statistics, when you withdraw police from an area, crime goes down because less of it is recorded. No, we're not withdrawing the police. We're reallocating resources to other departments that may be more capable of dealing with the root reasons why people commit crime. Not just like, so for an analogy, right? Let's go with an analogy, right? Crime is a bad thing, broadly speaking, right? It's probably not good to do crime, depending on what it is, of course. I mean, I would never advocate for people to do crime on my platform, of course, but that's interesting. I need to do something about my alerts there, not filling out the whole screen. What was I gonna say? Let's use an analogy, right? So crime is generally like a thing you don't want to happen. You don't want people to feel like they need to commit crime, right? So how do you handle this? How do you deal with crime and make it occur less? Well, let's imagine it's like weeds in a garden, right? Now, you can go all day, every day, ripping out the stem and the leaves of the weeds growing in your garden, but they're just going to come right back a couple days later, and you're going to be right back to where you were. That's what the police do. The police are like people who weed their garden, except they only pull off the leaves and the stems. They don't actually deal with the root, and that's what you have to do. You have to go down to the root and rip it out with the root, leaves, and stem. You have to rip all of the weeds out, okay? And the police don't do that. So reallocating resources to other departments within our criminal justice system is probably a good idea, so we can more effectively hit the root of the problem. Because I'm sorry, but dealing with poverty is just not like poverty. Decreasing poverty and the reasons why people commit crime just isn't something the police do or are capable of in their current state. It's just not possible. That's why the police either need to be massively reformed or defunded and have their resources allocated to other departments more specialized in these issues. Or, ideally, both of these things.
Very easy. But according to AOC, it's all because of bread lines. It's all because of bread. People aren't shooting bread. They're not. Okay, they're not shooting the bread, and they're not stealing the bread. That's not what's going on here. They're not going down to the local grocery store and just picking up a bag of veggies and then holding up.
This is like a 15-year-old like shitbag like fuckboy libertarian's understanding of why crime is committed. Like Ben Shapiro is saying right now what I would expect from basically any like edgelord 15-year-old libertarian white boy gamer in a game of CS:GO to say if I brought up politics to them, or like in a Fortnite rally, like a Fortnite lobby. That's what we're getting from Ben Shapiro right now. This is his understanding of this issue.
Up the counter clerk. That's not what's happening. People are being shot in mass numbers because you decided to remove the police. This is all genius, galaxy brain kind of stuff here. Okay, what you're talking about here is just people who are acting like criminals. And I think it's fair to call a person who shoots a child a thug. I think that's fair, regardless of race. So if you do that, I have very little sympathy for the idea that you are doing this out of sheer desperation because you lost your job. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think anybody goes and loses their job in the United States. They go, you know what? I'm going to go shoot the 13-year-old on the next block.
Okay, so let's talk about why this is the last, like, this is the end of his video here. Like, he doesn't, yeah, it's literally just his outro after this where he does his little sponsored thing. Okay, let's talk about why this is, like, not a good argument, right? So let's talk about what Ben Shapiro did in this video, okay? So for starters, he looked at a very small spike in crime that occurred, despite the fact that America as a whole has been on a downward. Holy shit! Thank you very much. I'll get to that in a second. In a mostly like net downward surge of crime, as a whole. So he clipped out just this tiny spike that we've gotten here. Also, that's the tier 4 music. It sounds really good. He clips out this tiny spike and tries to claim that this is because of the fact that lately we've been withdrawing police, and police have been saying that they're not going to enforce petty, nonviolent crime quite as much in these areas, like New York City, for example, ignoring the fact that crime, and this is a basic reality, crime happens because of poverty, while also ignoring the fact that there is a worldwide pandemic happening right now, and we're heading headfirst at full speed into an economic recession. So, yeah. And then Ben Shapiro goes on to argue against the idea, the basic truth of criminology, which is poverty equals crime, by saying, yeah, well, here's a story about a guy that shot a 3-year-old child. I know it's just one story, but you're gonna tell me that guy did that because of because he was hungry and he had to feed his family. He shot that child to do that so he could get some bread. Like, no, people murder and rape children whether there's a massive pandemic happening and we're in a bad socioeconomic situation no matter what. This happens all the time. When we talk about a rise in crime, we're talking about violent crime, things like shootings, which you pointed to a lot in this video, Ben Shapiro, things like robbery. And then when we talk about nonviolent crime, we talk about possession, larceny, burglary, trespassing and breaking and entering. So, yeah, Ben Shapiro is a hack. And I am so amazed at how often I'm able to basically eviscerate every argument Ben Shapiro puts forward when I cover his videos. It's a good feeling, though, because Ben Shapiro is like the logic bro of the left. I actually, or of the right, sorry. The other day, I was watching a streamer that I really, really like, and he's not like a very political dude, but he was talking about Ben Shapiro and joking about Ben Shapiro for some reason, and somebody asked him, wait, who's Ben Shapiro? And he said, he's like this short 5'2" Jewish guy who just hates minorities and women. And that was just like, that was the long and short of it. He didn't get into a political discussion or anything, it was just, he's like a 5'2" short, angry Jewish man who hates minorities. It was fucking great. I laughed my ass off.